Hey guys, welcome back to Daily Kaylee. Today's episode is about the Roanoke Colony. I don't know if it was just me because I'm fucking weird, but when I learned about this in, I want to say it was like middle school, I was super fucking interested. And I was like, bro, how are we not solving this problem? How do we not know what happened and we're just gonna let it go? So, a lot of people hate season 6 of American Horror Story because it's about Roanoke and they think it's hella boring. But I fucking loved that shit. I was like, yes, let's get more interested in this. Somebody please solve this mystery, please. So, that is why we're here today. And that is why I chose this to be part of my 13 days of Halloween. If you somehow do not know what the Roanoke Colony was, it is also referred to as the Lost Colony for a very important reason. But just a little bit of background on what it actually was. The Roanoke Colony was first founded in 1585, and it was supposed to be the first permanent English settlement in North America. The first Roanoke Colony was established by Ralph Lane in 1585 on Roanoke Island, which is now in Dare County, North Carolina. They came and stayed for a little bit. It was kind of a huge failure. They weren't really successful, so they went back to England. However, the second attempt to colonize the island was in 1587, and it was led by John White. The entire population of the island disappeared randomly. There were no traces of them whatsoever. And that's why it's super interesting and super fucking creepy, honestly. So, the Roanoke Island would be what is now the present-day Outer Banks area of North Carolina. The colony was not found to be abandoned or deserted for 3 years after re-establishing it. After, being re-established in 1587. So, the first attempt to settle in Roanoke, the reason that was unsuccessful is because they just did not have enough supplies, and they did not have a strong relationship with the local natives, so they literally had no help. They were literally just vibing on this island. They had nothing. They were waiting on supplies to come from England. They were being sent over by ship, and they had been waiting, and it was delayed. So they decided to just say, fuck this. They went back to England, and that was that. Miles, stop. The supply ship arrived 2 weeks later, and it was led by Richard Greenville. Richard made just a small number of men stay on the island to protect it and make sure that no one else tried to claim it. In 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh sent John White on an expedition to pretty much go and establish the city of Raleigh. He had him stop and check on Greenville's men, and the pilot insisted that John White's entire ship of colonists remain on the Roanoke Island. John White left his men there, and he returned back to England, and he intended to bring more supplies to the colony in 1588. However, a war broke out in England, and this delayed his return until 1590. When he returned back to the island, he found the settlement was established. It seemed to be successful this time around, but it was abandoned. He found the word Croatoan carved into the palisade, which is pretty much just like a fence made of stakes. It's just like a defense structure. He thought that this meant that all of the colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island. However, the lead has been followed before, and there was no one there. The number of exact colonists is unknown, but there was between 112 and 121, and they just all disappeared. No bodies were found. There was no trace of them. The settlers of Jamestown actually investigated Roanoke, because this was the first model colony they had to go off of, and they produced reports that the Roanoke settlers were massacred. But once again, there was no evidence of this whatsoever. There was nothing to go off of. After this, the interest in the Roanoke colony kind of died down until the early 1800s, And since then, it's still been like a huge topic, like what the hell happened at Roanoke. There's a huge theory that the natives are the ones who massacred the colonists. The reason that this is extremely unlikely is because before the first expedition to Roanoke, the natives are the ones who came out to make contact with the English. They had a friendly relationship, and while they were, like, seeking out a place to colonize is when this happened. But when they returned back to England, the Englishmen spoke extremely highly of the tribe. They were super hospitable. They wanted to help. They wanted to have a nice relationship, and they thought that it would be perfectly safe. Even though the first settlement did not have a strong relationship with the natives, it's believed that the second one did because they were so much more successful. It was also assumed, since this time around women and children were going along on the expedition to the island, that the natives would not harm the women or children. Also, I think it is important to say that when the second expedition arrived, all of Greenville's men that were supposed to stay there were gone. The fort was completely dismantled, the houses were completely vacant, and there was no sign that they'd ever even been there. There's also evidence that they did try to reestablish relations with the Croatoan, which were the natives on the island. They wanted to negotiate a truce, just enough so that they could both live in peace. In 1590, when the relief boats were finally able to make it back with the supplies, they saw a column of smoke on Roanoke Island. The next morning, they saw another column of smoke on Croatoan Island. They investigated this column of smoke to see if some of the settlers were there, and there was nothing. 2 days later, they saw a fire on Roanoke Island, and they rowed towards it, but it was dark, and they did not want to risk going ashore in the dark, pretty much. They spent the night in the boats, and they would sing English songs and talk loudly, hoping that the colonists would hear them and try to respond. So, the following morning, after about 3 days of being in the water near the island, they made it to the shore, they got off the boats, and they found fresh tracks in the sand, but no one was there and no one came to greet them. They also discovered the letters CRO carved into a tree. Once they actually got to the site of the colony, that's when they noticed that they had built a palisade around the entrance of the colony, and Croatoan was carved into one of the posts. John White thought this was an absolute sign that they had relocated to Croatoan Island. Apparently, in 1587, when they went back to Roanoke Island, they came up with a plan that they would leave kind of like a secret token to indicate their destination. However, if they were being coerced to go anywhere, if they were in any form of duress at all, they were going to leave a cross carved into something on the island. Once they got past the palisade, they found that all of the houses had been dismantled, and anything that could have been carried was gone. None of the boats were there, and several large trunks that contained belongings that the other settlers had left behind had been dug up and looted. Obviously, John White failed to find the colonists, but in his report, he suggested that they relocated and they were probably going to be found alive. Sir Walter Raleigh really couldn't care less. As long as they could not be proven dead, he was allowed to keep his claim on the colony in Virginia. In 1595, Sir Walter Raleigh actually claimed that he was going to search for the lost colonists, but this was a cover-up for him actually searching for El Dorado. On the return home, he did sail past the Outer Banks. He couldn't land because of the weather, but once again, he saw no signs of life on these islands. In 1602, he went on a mission back to the Outer Banks, and once again, he said that he wanted to resume the search. This wasn't his main reason for going. He just wanted to harvest sassafras off of Croatoan Island, and bad weather once again prevented them from lingering in the area, so they found nothing. A year later, he was actually arrested for treason against King James, so that's the end of him. Between 1607 and 1609, right after the Jamestown colony was established, John Smith was captured by the Powhatan, and he met with their leader. They described to him a place that they called the Okanahonen, and according to the Powhatan leader, these men wore European-style clothing, and another place by the name of Annone had walled houses. After Smith returned back to his colony, he made arrangements to investigate this place where they wore European dress. The natives produced a map of the region and labeled the villages so he could find them. There was also a place called Pakrakenik with a note that said, "Here remaineth 4 men clothed that came from Roanoke to Okanahonan." In 1608, John Smith sent a letter about the information and the map back to England. However, when they investigated these places, they could not find any sign of the Roanoke colonists living in these areas. In 1610 and 1612, William Strachey arrived in Jamestown, and he led another expedition to find the Roanoke colonists. He had a theory that the lost colonists had spent the past 20 years living peacefully with the tribe beyond the Powhatan territory. He says that they were eventually slaughtered, and 7 English survived, 4 men, 2 boys, and 1 woman, and he believes that they fled up the Cowan River. He also believed that the Powhatan religion was satanic, and that they might literally be in communion with Satan. So his final belief was that the Powhatan sacrificed the Roanoke colonists. In 1625, after the Powhatan attacked Jamestown, Samuel Purchas wrote a journal entry saying that the Powhatan confessed to Captain Smith that they were responsible for the slaughter of the Roanoke people and that they had proof to show. This has never been proven. No one else in the colony wrote about this, including Captain John Smith. So this is sort of just like a he said, she said sort of deal. In 1701, John Lawson explored northern Carolina, and eventually Croatoan Island and Roanoke Island came to be into pretty much one island, and it was Hatteras Island. While he was discovering the region, he noticed that the people there seemed to have been from English descent. They were extremely influenced by English culture, and they reported that several of their ancestors had been white. Some of them had gray eyes, and he assumed that members of the lost colony had sort of joined this community after they lost all hope of regaining contact with anyone from England. While he was visiting Roanoke Island itself, he reported that he found remains of a fort, as well as some English coins, firearms, and a powder horn. In 1995, after Hurricane Emily came along in North Carolina, an anthropologist by the name of David Sutton Phelps Jr. organized an excavation of the land. In 1998, they discovered a ring, which seemed to have been brass or gold, and it had the heraldry of a family by the name of Kendall from the 16th century. They couldn't confirm the connection. However, it was extremely likely that this was left there by someone in the Roanoke colony. It could have been brought back at a later time, but it made no sense. It was also extremely hard to tell what artifacts could have came from the 1585 colony, because Native Americans traded with other European settlements around that same time. It was also extremely hard because, once again, there were no human remains that were found. And because Roanoke was an island, it suffered from shoreline erosion, so anything of significance could have been lost underwater. In November of 2011, researchers from the First Colony Foundation noticed that there were 2 corrective patches on the map that John White produced. The British Museum examined the original map with a light table. One of the patches, which was at the point of the Roanoke and the Cowan Rivers where they connected, was found to cover a symbol which represented a fort. The symbol covers an area of the map which represented thousands of acres in Bertie County, North Carolina. They believed that the location was either in or near the 16th century village of Medequam. In 2012, they prepared to excavate where the symbol indicated. And they call this location Site X because, X marks the spot. In October of 2017, they made a statement. They reported that they found fragments of Tudor pottery and weapons at Site X. The Tudor period was between 1485 and 1603 in England. So this supports the theory that this could have been where the Roanoke colonists migrated to. They said that these findings indicate that at least a small number of colonists were residing peacefully in the area. The only challenge that they faced was finding out whether these finds could have been brought by the 1585 Lane colony and not the Roanoke colony. In 1998, researchers also concluded that there was an extreme drought between 1587 and 1589. They measured growth rings from a network of cypress trees, and out of the data they produced, it showed the time span from 1185 to 1984. The year 1587, when the Roanoke colony was reestablished, was the worst growing season in the entire 800-year period. Based on these findings, it is also a theory that the Roanoke colonists simply starved to death or ate each other. Millie, help. There you go, baby. More. There you go. That had to be better, right, Millie? No. Okay. Yes? No. What about now? Hey, baby. In 2005, computer scientist Roberta Estes has founded several organizations, basically just to analyze DNA. She created a project to analyze the DNA of potential Native American descendants of the Roanoke colony to see if this theory was plausible. However, after 14 years, by 2019, they have still not been able to identify any living descendants. So there's still nothing to put into that theory. Adrian Masters, who is a historian from the University of Texas, once said that the Roanoke colony is the Area 51 of colonial history. The main theory to this day is that they simply joined other tribes, which I honestly, yes, it is plausible, but do I believe that? No, because I want it to be more interesting. This is actually very supported by evidence, and in the 1880s, state legislator Hamilton McMillan proposed that the Native American community in Robeson County, North Carolina, had surnames that came from the 1587 colonists. There's also been numerous reports of encounters with pale-skinned, blonde-haired people among various Native American tribes, and these come from as early as 1607. There's actually a book that came out in June of this year called The Lost Colony in Hatteras Island, and it was written by Scott Dawson. In this book, he claims that the colonists merged with the Croatoan people, and he says, they were never lost. It was made up. The mystery is over. And that is fucking false, Scott Dawson. The mystery is not over, you don't know shit, and it was not made up. It is literally called The Lost Colony. The title of your book is The Lost Colony. There's also a theory that once they joined a neighboring tribe, they would have spread English diseases to the tribe that they were not equipped for, and essentially they all would have perished because of these diseases. There's also a theory that acquaintances of Sir Walter Raleigh wanted to undermine him and just ruin his expedition to Roanoke. And they planned to maroon the 1587 colonists at Roanoke. If you don't know what the term maroon means, basically it's the act of abandoning someone in a territory that is uninhabited. There's literally nothing there on purpose, like a deserted island, which is Roanoke. There's also a theory that colonists were attacked by the natives and that they were pretty much treated as slaves until they were completely dispersed throughout the region. Another theory that was brought up by citizens of Dare County. There's a local legend that refers to an abandoned settlement called Beachland, which is now located within the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, so no one lives there. The area has apparently had reports of small coffins, some which had Christian markings, and this encouraged the speculation of a link to the lost colony. Based on this, people believe that Sir Walter Raleigh dispatched the colonists to harvest sassafras along the Alligator River. Historians believe that, if this theory is true, all records that suggested the colony's intended destination was Chesapeake Bay, and any suggestion that England had lost contact with the colony was falsified to conceal the operation from Spanish operatives and competitors. According to historians, they believe that Sir Walter Raleigh quietly re-established contact with the colony by 1597, and that all of his expeditions that he took to Croatoan Island harvest sassafras, he was actually just picking up the colonist harvest. According to historians, This colony was not truly abandoned until the secret of the colony's location died when Raleigh died in 1618. To this point, they believed that the colonists would have began to join the Croatoan at Beachland. The last piece of evidence that I have to present to you about this case. The Dare Stones. 1937 to 1941, a series of inscribed stones were discovered that claimed to have been written by Eleanor Dare, who was part of Roanoke colony. These stones told the travelings of the colonists and ultimately their deaths. Most historians believe that these are a fraud, but quite a few historians believe that this is completely genuine. Honestly, based on a chemical analysis of these stones, it's highly supported that these could be real. If you all are interested in the Lost Colony, stay tuned for my movie Cape Creek, which will be on YouTube this winter. Thanks guys, see you later.